The Callaway farm had not seen a woman in 3 years, and it showed. Maren Elliott arrived on a Tuesday in late October, when the prairie grass had gone the color of old straw and the sky pressed down low and gray over the Alberta flatlands. She had come by wagon from Lethbridge, sitting beside the driver without speaking. For 4 hours, her hands folded in her lap over a cloth bag that held everything she owned. The driver, a Mr. Osgood, had not attempted conversation after the first quarter hour. There was something in the way she held herself, not cold, exactly, but contained, like a jar with the lid screwed on tight, that discouraged easy talk. She had not eaten since the morning before. The farm appeared first as a line of dark fence posts against the pale horizon, then as a cluster of low buildings, a barn, a grain shed, a house that might once have been painted white. A windbreak of spruce ran along the north edge of the property, the trees leaning slightly east as all trees did out here, bent by years of arguing with the wind and never quite winning. Mr. Osgood set her bag down in the yard without ceremony and climbed back onto the wagon seat. He looked at her once, before he clicked his tongue at the horse. "Good luck to you, Miss Elliott," he said, not unkindly. She stood in the yard after the wagon had gone and listened to the quiet. It was not an empty quiet. There were chickens somewhere behind the barn, and the sound of something being hammered at a steady, unhurried pace from inside the grain shed. Wind moved through the spruce. A dog, old and reddish-brown, came around the corner of the house and looked at her without barking. The hammering stopped. A man appeared in the doorway of the grain shed, wiping his hands on a rag. He was perhaps 40, perhaps a little more, with the kind of face that had been worked on by the outdoors for a long time, darkened and creased around the eyes, jaw set in a way that looked permanent. He wore no hat indoors. His hair was dark, going gray at the temples. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they were expecting, but weren't entirely sure they wanted. "You're the woman from the notice," he said. It was not a question. "I am Maren Elliott." She met his eyes directly. "I saw your advertisement in the Lethbridge Herald. Housekeeper and general help." He studied her for a moment. "You're younger than I expected. You didn't specify an age in the notice." Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but adjacent to one. "No," he said, "I didn't." He crossed the yard toward her, tucking the rag into his back pocket. "Philip Callaway. How do you do, Mr. Callaway?" He picked up her bag before she could reach for it and walked toward the house without asking permission to do so. She followed. The inside of the house was not dirty precisely. It was the home of a man who cleaned what needed cleaning and left the rest alone. The floor had been swept. The dishes were stacked. But there was a film of grease on the stovetop that spoke of months of neglect, and the curtains in the front room had not been washed in what looked like years. A boy's boot sat beside the door with no partner. "My son is at school," Philip said, setting bag near the bottom of the stairs. "He'll be back at 4. His name is Thomas. He's 11. Does he know you've hired someone?" "He knows I was trying." Maren took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. "What happened to your previous housekeeper?" Philip was quiet for a moment. "She left in the spring. Family trouble down in Medicine Hat." He paused. "Before her, my wife managed things." Maren did not ask about the wife. She asked instead to see the pantry, the laundry room, the account book if there was one. Philip showed her the first 2 without comment. At the mention of the account book, he went still for just a moment, almost imperceptible, but she noticed. "There's a ledger," he said, "in the desk in the back room. I'll show you later." "That's fine." She was already assessing the pantry. The flour was low. There were 2 jars of preserves, peaches from the label, that should have been 4 or 6 at this point in the season. The butter was nearly gone. Do you have an account at the general store in town? Henderson's, yes. I'll need to go over it. He looked at her. It's been managed. I'm sure it has, she said evenly. I'd still like to see it. He did not argue, but he did not look entirely comfortable either. The first week, Maren did not touch the account book. She cleaned the stovetop and the curtains. She restocked the pantry with what the farm's own stores could provide and what she could justify charging to the Henderson account. Having walked into town herself on the Wednesday and introduced herself to Mr. and Mrs. Henderson in the way that a person does when they intend to be in a place for some time, she made bread. She repaired a tear in Thomas's winter coat that he had been wearing with a gap down the left elbow for what appeared to be at least a month. Thomas Calloway was a quiet boy, dark-haired like his father, with the same contained quality but softer at the edges, not yet shaped by the same years and weather. He watched her from a careful distance for the first few days, the way children do when they are testing whether someone is going to stay. On the fourth evening, he sat at the kitchen table while she made supper and did not leave. Papa doesn't cook much, he offered. I've gathered that, she said. He tries, but he burns things. Most people burn things when they're busy with other things. Thomas considered this. Mama used to cook. He said it the way a person says something they've been carrying for a while and have decided to set down. She died 2 years ago. Fever. Maren kept her hands moving. I'm sorry, she said. That's a very hard thing. Papa doesn't talk about it. Some people grieve quietly, she said. It doesn't mean they feel it less. Thomas looked at her with a directness that reminded her strongly of his father. How do you know? She was quiet for a moment. Because I lost my mother when I was 14, she said, and my father 2 years ago. I know what quiet grief looks like. Thomas nodded slowly, as though filing this information somewhere important. After that, he brought his schoolwork to the kitchen table every evening and did it there while she worked, and neither of them made mention of it as an arrangement. The account book, when Maren finally opened it on a Thursday evening, after Thomas had gone to bed and Philip had gone to the barn for his last check of the horses, told her something she had half suspected. It was not falsified. Philip Calloway was not that kind of man. She had already arrived at that conclusion through the accumulating evidence of small things. The way he paid for her groceries in cash without being asked. The way he replaced Thomas's boot from his own pocket the week after she mentioned the missing partner. The way the farm hands, 2 brothers, Dale and Emmett Vance, who arrived each morning, spoke to him without wariness. Dishonest employers produced wary men. Dale and Emmett were not wary, but the ledger was a disaster, not of corruption, of neglect, of a man who was very good at running cattle and very bad at sitting still long enough to think about money. There were payments recorded in the wrong columns. There were debts listed without dates. There were Henderson's charges that had been noted on loose slips of paper, tucked inside the cover and never transferred to the proper page. 3 of those slips were from last spring. 1 was from the winter before. Maren sat at the desk for 2 hours. She went through each page from the beginning. She made a separate list of everything that needed correcting and another list of everything that appeared to be outstanding. When Philip came in from the barn, she was still at the desk. He stood in the doorway of the back room. She could feel him there before she looked up. "You found the ledger," he said. "You knew I would eventually." He was quiet. He came in and sat down in the chair across from the desk. The chair where, she had noticed, a stack of unread newspapers lived. He looked at the paper spread out before her. "How bad is it?" he said. Not quite a question. "It isn't catastrophic," she said, "but it's been let go long enough that it's going to take some work to straighten out." There are 3 debts here I can't reconcile without seeing the original agreements. She set her pen down. Mr. Calloway, did you enter into a timber arrangement with a man named Strachan last February? Something moved across his face. Yes, there's an amount recorded, $140. But there's no date of repayment and no interest noted. Do you have the written agreement? There wasn't one. She looked at him steadily. I see. Strachan was a neighbor. It was a verbal arrangement. Verbal arrangements are difficult to dispute when one party later recalls them differently. Philip leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He was looking at the floor. I know that, he said quietly. I knew that when I did it, but it was winter, and the fence line was down, and I needed the timber. Has Mr. Strachan been repaid? Not fully. 80 of it. And the 60 remaining. He hasn't pressed for it. That doesn't mean he won't. She picked up her pen again. I'd like to write to him. A letter acknowledging the debt and proposing a repayment date. If he agrees in writing, you'll have a record. Philip looked up at her then. You'd write the letter. It's within what you've hired me to do. He studied her for a long moment, not suspicious exactly. More like a man encountering a thing he hadn't anticipated and was deciding how to hold it. All right, he said. Write the letter. The letter to Gus Strachan went out that Friday. By the following Wednesday, a reply had come back, scrawled on brown paper in the large, deliberate hand of a man who wrote infrequently. $60 settlement agreed. November 15th fine. Thank you for the straight dealing, Calloway. G. Strachan read it once, set it on the desk, and went back to the kitchen. She did not say, I told you so. She had never found much use for that sentence. But over the following days she could feel a shift in the house, the way you can feel the barometric pressure change before a storm. Not in the temperature, but in something less easily named. Philip spoke more in the evenings, not a great deal more. He was not a man who produced words in quantity, but he had taken to sitting at the kitchen table after Thomas went to bed, with a cup of coffee, while Maren worked on the account book, or her mending. He did not always say anything. He seemed to find the company itself sufficient. One evening she looked up and found him watching her work with an expression she couldn't entirely read. You're very organized, he said. Yes, it's a useful thing. It is. She kept writing. My father was a bookkeeper. In Halifax. I grew up watching him. You're from Nova Scotia. Originally, I came west 6 years ago. She did not elaborate on why, and he did not ask. That was one of the things she had come to appreciate about Philip Calloway. He did not pry. He seemed to understand that a person's history belonged to them until they chose to give it away. Why did you leave the East? He said. It was not a challenge. It was a quiet question, asked the way a man asks something he genuinely wants to know. Maren set down her pen. There was nothing left to stay for, she said. My father died. The house was rented. I'd been taking in accounts work for a solicitor's office, enough to live on, but not enough to build anything. I read about Alberta in a gazette and I thought, she paused. I thought, if everything is gone anyway, I might as well go somewhere I've never been, start a different kind of gone. He was quiet for a moment. A different kind of gone, he repeated, as though considering the phrase. I was 22, she said. I thought that was wise. Wasn't it? She thought about Lethbridge, the 3 positions before this one. The family who'd let her go, when their daughter returned from school, the woman who'd decided she didn't need help, after all. The household, where the husband had been something she'd simply left without explanation. The cloth bag with everything she owned. Parts of it were, she said. In November, the trouble with the Henderson account came fully to light. It had been building. Maren had seen the shape of it in the ledger. discrepancies between what was charged and what was received, small amounts that individually looked like simple errors, but together made a pattern. She had spent 2 weeks confirming her arithmetic before she said anything, because she was not a woman who made accusations she could not support. She went into Henderson's on a Monday morning when the store was quiet. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, a narrow man with a careful way of moving, like someone always aware of breakable things nearby. His wife worked the dry goods side of the store, moving bolts of fabric with a cheerful efficiency that Maren had noticed and admired on previous visits. "Good morning, Miss Elliott," Mr. Henderson said. "What can I do for you?" "Good morning, Mr. Henderson." She set her list on the counter, and then beside it, her copy of the relevant ledger pages. "I'm hoping you can help me with something. I've been going through the Callaway account, and I've found some entries I can't reconcile with what was actually delivered to the farm." Mr. Henderson looked at the papers. He did not pick them up immediately. "Accounting errors happen," he said pleasantly. "They do," Maren agreed. "That's why I'm here, rather than anywhere else. I thought it most likely to be clerical. But I've found 5 instances over 14 months where the amount billed to Mr. Callaway's account doesn't correspond to what I can confirm was received. The total discrepancy is $22.40. A pause. Mrs. Henderson had stopped moving the bolts of fabric. $22 is a significant clerical error, Maren continued, her voice perfectly even. "I imagine you'd want to correct it." Mr. Henderson looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, calculation, or conscience, or some mixture of the two. "I'll need to check my own records," he said. "Of course." She folded her hands on the counter. "I'll wait." He went into the back room. She heard drawers open and close. She did not look at Mrs. Henderson, who had become very interested in a bolt of brown twill. When Mr. Henderson came back, he set a small amount of paper money on the counter. $22.40, by the look of it. "An error in our records," he said. "My apologies, Miss Elliott. Please convey my apologies to Mr. Callaway as well." "I certainly will," she said. She picked up the money. "Thank you for seeing to it so promptly." She walked back to the farm. The wind was cold and direct out of the northwest the way it always was in November, and she pulled her coat tighter without breaking stride. She was not angry. She was past anger. What she felt was the particular satisfaction of a thing set right. Not revenge, exactly, because Mr. Henderson's small dishonesty was really a symptom of something larger. The assumption that a man who was busy and distracted and trusting would not notice, would not have anyone to notice on his behalf. Well, he did now. She put the money on Philip's desk that evening, with a written account of the conversation. He came to the back room after supper and stood reading it for a long time. Then he came to the kitchen doorway and looked at her. $22, he said. "Yes, Henderson, yes." He was quiet. His jaw had the set it got when he was working something through. How long? At least 14 months. Possibly longer. I only have 14 months of receipts to compare, and he stopped. He just gave it back. He had little choice. The records were clear. She was washing the supper dishes. "I would advise switching to a cash basis, with Henderson going forward, or at least reviewing the account monthly. If he knows someone is watching, he won't try it again." Why wouldn't he just deny it? "Because I came in calmly, and with documentation. If I had come in angry, he could have dismissed it. The way I came in, there was nothing to dismiss." She paused. "My father taught me that. The angrier you look, the easier you are to ignore." Philip stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he crossed to the cupboard, took down 2 cups, and poured coffee from the pot on the stove, without asking whether she wanted any. He set a cup on the counter beside the sink. It was such a small thing. It was so plainly not a small thing. Maren dried her hands and picked up the cup and did not say anything about it at all. December came in, hard, snow on the 2nd, then a week of bitter cold that kept Thomas inside and drove the cattle to the windbreak and turned the water in the outside trough to solid gray ice each night. Maren settled into the rhythm of the farm, the way she had learned to settle into things. Not by forcing her way in, but by making herself quietly necessary. She kept the house warm. She kept Thomas fed and his schoolwork organized. She found the pattern in the accounts and maintained it. She wrote the letters that needed writing, to suppliers, to a cousin in Ontario, who held a small interest in the land and needed to be kept current, to the solicitor in Calgary, who managed some remaining paperwork from Philip's wife's estate. That last one, Philip had asked her to handle with particular care. "There's money," he had said one evening with some difficulty, "from her family. It was to come to her and then to Thomas when he's of age. There's been a dispute about whether it should come sooner." He had looked at the window. "Her brother thinks I've mismanaged it, have you?" "No," flat and certain. "But I can't always make people believe a thing just by saying it." "No," she agreed. "You need to show them." She spent 3 evenings on that letter. When she handed it to Philip to read, he went through it twice without speaking. The second time, she saw his shoulders ease down from where they'd been holding, somewhere near his ears. "This is better than anything I could have done," he said. "It's what the situation required." He folded the letter and looked at her. Maren. It was the first time he had used her given name. He stopped, as though surprised by it himself. She waited. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." She nodded. "I'll post it tomorrow." January was the month Thomas got sick. It was croup. The doctor in Lethbridge confirmed. Riding out through 8 inches of new snow, because Maren had sent for him, and because her message had described the symptoms clearly enough that he came the same day instead of waiting. Thomas was feverish for 6 days. Maren slept in the chair in his room for the first 3, and kept the steam tent going through the nights, and made sure he drank whether he wanted to or not. Philip stayed close. He was not a man who hovered. She had noticed this about him, but during those 6 days, he found reasons to be in or near the house constantly. He split wood in the yard where he could hear the house. He ate his meals at the kitchen table, instead of standing at the counter the way he sometimes did. On the 3rd night, when Thomas's breathing was rough, and the doctor had said to watch for any change, in the sound of it, Philip came to the doorway of the boy's room at 2 in the morning and did not say anything. He just stood there for a while, watching his son sleep, and then he looked at Maren in the chair, and then he went back to the hall and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. He stayed there until morning. She did not tell him he should sleep. She understood what he was doing and why. Some things you can only stand watch over. Thomas recovered. By the end of the week he was sitting up and demanding to know if he'd missed anything important at school, and Maren told him with a straight face that she was fairly certain he hadn't, and went back downstairs to make soup. Philip was at the kitchen table. "He's asking about school," she said. Something crossed Philip's face then, relief and something else, something that took her a moment to name. It was tenderness, the open, unguarded kind, the kind that comes through when a person is too tired to maintain the usual wall of composure. "Good," he said, roughly. "That's good." She put the soup on the stove and did not look at him again for a while, because it seemed like the private kind of moment a person deserved to have without being watched. February brought the letter back from the solicitor in Calgary. The dispute over Thomas's inheritance had been, in the solicitor's careful phrasing, resolved in Mr. Calloway's favor, owing, in part, to the thorough documentation provided. The money would be released into trust for Thomas at age 18, as originally intended, with a small sum available for his education, should it be needed before then. Philip read the letter standing at the desk. Then he read it again. He folded it and set it down and stood very still for a moment. Then he came to find her. She was in the backyard, hanging laundry in the thin winter sun, the sheets and the flannel blankets from Thomas' sick room, finally clean. "Marin." She turned. He held up the letter. She had seen enough of his face by now to read it. And what she read was a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could set it down. "It worked," he said. "I read it," she said. "I'm glad." He stood there in the yard, and she turned back to the laundry, and for a while there was just the sound of the wind and the sheets moving and the distant sound of Dale Vance working on something in the barn. "Why did you stay?" Philip said. "Here, after the first month." She kept her hands moving. "I needed the work." "That's not what I mean." She paused. She looked at him over the clothesline. "There were other positions," he said, "in town. You mentioned Mrs. Forsyth last fall. Before she found someone else, you could have gone to her." Marin was quiet for a moment. "Thomas needed consistency," she said. "He did," Philip agreed. "What else?" She looked at him for a long time. He was standing in the yard with the letter in his hand and the February light on his face, and he was looking at her with the directness that she recognized by now as the way he asked for the truth. "The work here is real," she said finally. "Everything I do here matters. The accounts, the house. Thomas, it matters. I've had work before that didn't." She paused. "And you're a fair man. That's rarer than it should be." He was quiet. He looked down at the letter in his hand. "I haven't been particularly." He stopped. Tried again. "I know I'm not easy to work for." "You're not difficult," she said. "You're just quiet. There's a difference." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, as usual, but the shape one might leave behind. "Stay," he said. It came out plainly, without arrangement. Not a request exactly, and not a command. More like a statement of what he wanted, made by a man who did not often say directly what he wanted. "Not as a housekeeper." He looked up. "Or not only. I'm not." He paused again, and she could see him searching for the right words, with the same careful effort he gave to fixing a fence post, methodical, unhurried, committed to getting it right. "I'm not good at this. Saying things. I know that." "I know," she said, "but I'd like you to stay. If you were, if it was something you could want." The sheets moved in the wind. In the barn, Dale Vance had stopped working, and the yard was very quiet. Marin set down the clothes peg in her hand. "I think," she said slowly, "that would require a different conversation than this one." "Yes." He exhaled, and she realized he had been holding his breath. "Yes, I know." He looked at her. Would you be willing to have that conversation?" She looked at him for a long moment. Philip Calloway, with his weathered face and his careful hands and his late-night coffee, and the way he had sat on the floor in the hallway all night so his son would not be alone, even through a closed door, even without being asked. "Yes," she said. "I think I would." They were married in April, in the Lutheran church in Lethbridge, with Thomas standing beside his father, and Dale and Emmett Vance, sitting in the third pew looking scrubbed and slightly uncomfortable in their good coats. It was not a large wedding. Neither of them wanted that. Afterward, driving back to the farm in the wagon, Thomas sat between them on the bench. The prairie had gone green at the edges, the first tentative green of Alberta, spring, the kind that still looked surprised to be there. The sky was wide and pale blue. "Are you going to change anything?" Thomas asked. Marin looked at him. "Like what?" "I don't know. Things. Some things," she said. "The curtains in the front room need replacing. I've been meaning to do that for months." And I'd like to try a kitchen garden this year if your father doesn't mind. He won't, Thomas said with authority. I don't, Philip confirmed. What else? Thomas asked. Maren thought about it. The account book, now organized and current and running 6 months without a single discrepancy. The letters filed in order. The pantry properly stocked for the first time in years, by her own count. The fence line along the north pasture that Philip and the Vance brothers had finished in March, stronger now than it had been. The herd, larger this spring by 14 head. Nothing essential, she said. Thomas seemed satisfied with this. He leaned slightly against her side. Not quite on purpose, the way children do, and looked out at the road ahead. The farm appeared on the horizon the way it had the first time she'd seen it. Fence posts first, then buildings, then the line of spruce leaning east in the wind. But it looked different now, or perhaps she looked at it differently. She had come here with a cloth bag and a level voice and the patience to sit with a broken ledger until it made sense. She had not come here expecting anything. What she had found was that sometimes the life you build from what's left over turns out to be the one that fits. The wagon turned down the long drive to the house, and the old red dog came around the corner to meet them, tail moving slow and steady, the way it did for people who belonged.